For those of us who are addicted to elk hunting, we would probably all be divorced and out of a job if September lasted longer than a month. So.
Welcome to the Rich Outdoors, where we break down the tips, tactics, and strategies of hunting's greats to not only help you become better hunters, but to motivate and inspire you between hunting adventures. For more about us, including additional resources on our guests and links to everything we cover in the interview, check out therichoutdoors.net. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rich Outdoors podcast. Today's topic, my personal favorite, elk hunting. Though, as I record this, I just happened to look at the Oregon draw results, and I'm kind of bummed because I did not draw the tag I was hoping for, or any tag I was hoping for, but such is life. In this episode, I'm going to be chatting with Cody Jacobsen. Cody is not only an amazing elk caller and an amazing elk hunter, but he's more than qualified to also teach both. Cody has been pretty much completely submerged in elk hunting his entire life. Grew up around it, was able to hunt in his backyard. His dad is actually the owner of Bugling Bull Game Calls. So it's no doubt that Cody became an amazing caller and now has 8 world elk calling titles to back it up. Currently producing some of the best elk hunting content out there with his magazine, Extreme Elk. Cody is a great resource for all of us, and I think there's some truly great takeaways and some really great tips throughout this interview. So, enjoy. Today's episode is brought to you by Powder River Cartridge. If you're tired of going to the gun shop only to find they don't have the ammo in stock that you're looking for, check out powderrivercartridge.com. With great customer service and fast shipping, you'll get your high-quality, American-made ammo in no time. They also offer bulk discounts and free shipping options, so be sure to enter coupon code RO, that's the letter R, letter O, for 10% off your next order. Hey, Cody, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. How you been?
Doing good, Cody. Appreciate you having me on.
We're excited to dive into your knowledge. You have quite the extensive background, 8 world champion calling titles, and all your stuff you've been doing with Extreme Elk, and you're kind of the go-to source for how to call elk. For those who kind of don't have a full background on yourself or Extreme Elk and your magazine and all the things you're doing, could you give us like a quick background on yourself and maybe kind of what you're working on these days?
Yeah, I'll start off. Hi, my name is Corey, and I'm an elk hunter. That, in a nutshell, that's what it is. I just love elk hunting. I've been fortunate to have been raised around it and in a family that really embraces elk hunting. And outside of that, there's nothing special about what I do. I just have a passion for it and have a passion for sharing that with others. There are those who have maybe not got into elk hunting that have an interest in it, and I know that once they get in there, they're going to be hooked and addicted for life like we are. And it's exciting to see that and to be able to share some of those experiences and, whatever knowledge or tactics or anything that I've gained through several years of hard knocks and just experience. If I can share that with others and help shorten the learning curve or, just even increase their excitement for it, then I feel that's a success. So that's, in a nutshell, that's all we're trying to do with all of the platforms that we're involved in is just share that passion for elk hunting and help others improve their success and find that same excitement and passion.
So do you find as much pleasure in kind of teaching guys to elk hunt or to be the old wise man and teaching everyone how to do this as you do, say, calling elk and being out there?
Man, you called me an old wise man. That's I don't know if that's a compliment or not. No, it's there's nothing like being out there, and that's kind of the difference between calling in a contest and calling in the woods. The real contest is out in the mountains, and there's no comparison. But it's fun to take what we do and compete with others in a friendly way. It's not a cutthroat competition or anything. We're all friends, and it's kind of the same with teaching others about elk hunting or sharing those experiences. There's nothing like being out there and doing it. There's nothing like having a bull screaming in your face at 20 yards and slobber drooling off of his chin and all that. But if I can take that passion, that excitement I have for that, and share that with others and see them light up and get excited, then it's a good way to pass the other 11 months when the elk aren't bugling.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure, doing the magazine and just thinking and talking about elk year round, I'm sure it's pretty tough. You probably can't wait for September. I know that is for me, talking hunting every week on the podcast. I think it makes it worse in the off season because you're just itching to get out there.
I was going to say, some people, they say, oh, you're so lucky, but man, I guess there are good parts of it for sure, but yeah, it makes it really hard to make it through 11 months when you're thinking, writing, editing, talking, videoing, all of this stuff about elk hunting the rest of the year. It's like I said, there's nothing like the real thing, so it just makes us miss it more when we aren't out doing it.
And then it goes by so fast. I think we need to make September a longer month.
I've said that many times, but I think for those of us who are addicted to elk hunting, we would probably all be divorced and out of a job if September lasted longer than a month. So
You're probably right. Well, I know you're getting ready to head to Wyoming this year. Is that kind of your main focus for as far as elk goes, or what's your big game plan this year for elk?
Yeah, so this year I drew just a general tag in Wyoming and general elk license in Montana as well. So those will be the two hunts that I focus on in September. My son's also 12 this year, so we'll be focusing on getting him out and letting him experience some of archery elk hunting's finest. But yeah, Wyoming's kind of one of our, just fun hunts. We don't see a lot of trophy bulls, which has never really been our focus, but just good quality. There's elk there. We can always get into elk. The bugling action's usually really good, and this will be our 4th year hunting there, so we've got it kind of, never say pegged down or locked down, but we know where to start at least. The scouting's over. We just go there and hunt now. So it's definitely looking forward to that.
That's always nice when you have an area that you can continually go to and not have to feel like you're trying to learn everything the first time. Is kind of Wyoming one of your favorites, or what do you figure your favorite state to hunt is?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I live in Idaho, and kind of you mentioned it's nice to find an area that you don't have to scout every year. You can go back to and know you're going to get into elk. And we had an area like that here in Idaho for several years. In fact, probably 15, 16 years. And with forest fires and increased hunting pressure and the four-legged predators, the wolves being introduced or reintroduced, it's really changed the landscape in that area to the point where I haven't hunted it now for 3 years and don't really have a desire to go back just because it's gotten so drastically just challenging to find elk there. Areas do change. You get into that comfort zone, and it's been difficult for me to break out of that. I keep going back there year after year, and there aren't elk. And so it really took a couple of absolute failure years there to say, all right, we've got to move. But I guess there's no guarantee once you find an area it's going to stay great forever. But the area we found in Wyoming, and we move around quite a bit there still, exploring new areas. We aren't as locked into a specific spot. But yeah, I would say Wyoming's at the top of my list for just a general, we draw it every 1 or 2 years to be able to draw that fairly consistently and regularly is definitely one we look forward to.
So how does that kind of play into your tag strategy overall? I know you like to be able to hunt more than not, but what's your overall tag strategy as far as being able to have tags?
So I go on 2 elk hunts a year, just with, a family. I've got 3 children, and they're all active in sports and school and everything. So me being away more than, 2.5 weeks during September at any period of time is difficult. And really, I miss my family after a week of being out in the mountains and ready to come home for a few days. So I try to stagger 2 hunts, do one early in September and come home for a week or so, and then do another one. And I will make sure I have 2 elk tags in my pocket every year. So really it comes down to I put in for draw hunts, so I've got points in Arizona, I've got points in Nevada, points in Colorado. I drew Oregon last year with 10 points. So I've got some of these long-term draw strategies for more of the quality units. But then outside of that, I'm looking for where can I hunt every year. And so that, basically I've got Idaho, Montana, Wyoming that are familiar to me and I'm really looking at pretty consistently. And then if I need to, there's over-the-counter in Oregon, over-the-counter in Colorado that I'm not as familiar with, but I know I can, if I need to get a tag, I can go down there and go to the Walmart and buy a tag and go hunting.
I like that, to have two tags and then as well be working towards something that's more long term. I think that's a good strategy. Sometimes it can be hard though. These tags are kind of getting away from us. Like I know you drew a Utah tag. Are you still putting in for Utah?
I'm not. So I drew the Utah tag, what's it been, 3 years ago, and it took 10 points to draw. And when you draw an elk tag in Utah, you can't even apply again for 5 years. So I'm in the waiting period, and by the time I start buying points again, in 2 more years, I'm going to be so far behind the curve that realistically my chances are pretty minimal. So I haven't fully decided yet, but there's a chance I probably won't continue buying a license and points there.
The only upside to that is Utah is relatively cheap to just acquire points.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's like $65, I think, a year for the license.
Yeah, but that's $65 that we
it is, yeah.
And never get anything.
Yeah.
Do you put in for Colorado as well, or you kind of just go for the general over there?
I've got 11 points for elk and 11 points for deer in Colorado, and just kind of, the points are kind of a tough deal. It's in Colorado, it's kind of no man's land. That 11 points, there's really only 1 or 2 units that I realistically have a chance in the next 3 or 4 years of drawing that are in that point pool. Everything else is down in the 3 to 5 points that I could draw and burn my points. So I don't know why I'm holding out or what I'm holding out for, but I haven't found just the right unit to apply for. So I've bought points every year and haven't even applied for a hunt for 11 years.
Yeah, it seems like a tough strategy. You never know whether to keep going or to burn those points, but it seems like you're doing pretty well. You seem to kill elk every year, so you must be doing something right.
And that's what I've found is the quality draw hunts give you a chance at a bigger bull, limit people a little bit more in some instances, but I've also found that some of those draw hunts, the units are smaller, they're more tightly managed, and sometimes that focuses the hunters more. And we've actually, Oregon last year is a prime example. We couldn't get away from people in a unit that took us 10 points to draw. And I can go to places right here in Idaho or, Wyoming that are over the counter for residents or, general tags and not see a person in a week of hunting. So it's, there are pros and cons to both sides of it. And obviously the allure of those, the higher point, harder to draw, quality managed hunts is, hey, there's probably a higher age class of bulls and a higher concentration or higher population of bigger bulls there. So,
but to the caveat that I would say, do your research, because a lot of times that changes and a unit will get a reputation for being a great unit and it could fall off, in recent years before you draw that tag. So
absolutely.
Knowing kind of what that unit's doing when you're going to draw is very key.
Yeah, and if you're looking for big bulls, there are big bulls in every unit, even in over-the-counter general hunts. If you have the time and can put in that time and are willing to pass up smaller bulls and have the time to hunt as well as scout, there are mature quality bulls that can be found in every over-the-counter unit in just about every state in the West.
Absolutely. Sometimes it can be harder to pass up those bulls or those 270 to 300 bulls than it sounds.
Absolutely. I've got a very twitchy trigger finger, and it's hard for me to watch a mature bull, especially a representative bull in the area we're hunting. Even on the first or second day, it's pretty hard to let those go by.
Yep, absolutely. So you kind of hit on a little bit of, your problem in Idaho being that, the area's kind of just gone downhill due to, hunting pressure, due to the four-legged critters and predator pressure and things like that. And I know that's a big problem for a lot of people, and just some of their hunting areas have kind of just gone to crap, and, they're looking for greener grasses. So how does Corey go about finding new area? And how does he go about, locating a new honey hole?
My hunting style, I'm very aggressive, and it's all about just covering country and perseverance. I mean, I'd like to say, I've got this magic skill set that gets me into elk, and it's just not true. I struggle like everyone else, and sometimes I think I struggle more than most just because I get caught in a rut sometimes, and not caught in the rut, but in a rut. And, you know, we really struggled that area in Idaho. We went back there and kept going back, and I thought for so many years there were mature elk here, and it was, I wouldn't say easy hunting, but we knew it and it was comfortable. We could go back there, and then as it started tapering off, I just kept pushing harder and harder, and eventually you realize that it's not working. And so for me, trying to find a new area, my areas that I hunt, I hold them very sacred. I don't tell many people. Not many people know right where we hunt, and I try to keep it that way, just kind of low key. And so it kind of limits me on some of the areas I can hunt. If I want it low key, I can't go into areas where there are a lot of other people. I've got to find kind of those hidden gems, and that's really what I look for, is an area that people are either going to drive right past or overlook, or go in deeper. And sometimes going in deeper is difficult and presents its own challenges, because it takes you a couple days to get in there, and by the time you realize there's no elk, and a couple days out or whatever, it's your season's gone, and then it's desperation trying to just go to some of these little honey holes that we've had in the past and hope there's an elk there that we can hunt for a day or two. So when I'm looking for a new area, it's all about access, limited access, getting away from the crowds, and then finding some of those overlooked. Instead of looking right in the center and say, man, everybody hunts right here, I've got to hunt right around there, I focus maybe over in another corner that's kind of a hidden gem.
No, I think that's good advice. As far as, I think a lot of people can look at a map and say, okay, this is the farthest from anywhere. And a lot of times you'll look at a map and you think you're in the middle of nowhere, but eventually you're close to something on some way. And in this day and age, I think people are everywhere, and people go to that destination that's in the middle of nowhere, and no one can get to. And sometimes you get to there and there's more people than if you were right next to the trailhead. So it's kind of good. I think the hidden cubbies that you wouldn't think holding elk, or the hidden cubbies that you think people would be at, sometimes are the best ones.
Absolutely. And that it goes back. It's been probably 18, 19 years ago. We were hunting a new area. I had just moved down to Boise, and so I was out of my element, unfamiliar territory, and we were up hunting and struggling. We were hitting all these beautiful drainages and just couldn't get into elk, and we were hiking from daylight till dark and just really having a tough time. And after 4 or 5 days, we went back into town, closest town, to refuel and take a little break. And we were at the gas station, and an old man walked up, and I think he was probably at least half or not three-quarters intoxicated, but he walked up and said, "You're elk hunting, huh?" And we said, "Yeah, we're elk hunting," kind of, just laughed it off. And he said, "You want to know the secret to elk hunting?" And we're like, "Yeah, what's the secret there?" And he said, if you can't hear the highway, you've gone too far." And we joke.
Some truth to that.
Well, and the whole way back to camp, we were laughing and making fun of him. And I mean, it was just, we haven't seen the highway all week, let alone hear it. And no kidding, the next night we were driving back to camp, and we turned off on the highway, and there's a 6-point bull standing 40 yards off the highway. And we got out, and there was a chorus of bugling, 4 or 5 bulls bugling right there. We spent the next 3 days hunting that area off the highway. Our biggest challenge was hiding our vehicle so it wasn't visible from the highway. And we both shot 6-point bulls the next 3 days within, realistically 3/4 of a mile of the highway. We may not have been able to hear the traffic on the highway when we shot them, but we were a short shot away. And that's how we found this area. And of course, we pushed back in farther from there. But we joked every year, if you can't hear the highway, you've gone too far. And it was just one of those places.
I think I read an article about that down in Arizona, and that sometimes right next to the freeway is some of the best places, because no one thinks to hunt there, and they always want to get farther back. But I read that article a long time ago, and I think since then it's come to fruition many a times that I'd be chasing a big bull and I can hear cars on the highway.
Yep. And so you look at a stretch of highway that's 20 miles with no pullouts, no side roads going off of it. And realistically, on that 20-mile stretch, there's probably only going to be 1 or 2 people hunting it. And so, I'm not saying necessarily hunt where you can see the highway and stay within a half mile of it, but I look for areas like that are long stretches without any roaded access, where people are going to be more likely passing through rather than seeing it as a destination.
Yeah. So as far as not necessarily scout, I mean, we talked about scouting and finding new areas, but you get to Wyoming, and a lot of times we don't have the time to go, to these out of state areas to scout before our hunt. As far as hunting a new area, you're getting to a new area. Say you get to Wyoming and you say, I want to kind of scout this area, but also I'll be hunting it. How does that change your hunting style, or is it pretty much the same throughout?
Yeah, it's the same, and that's I've set up trail cameras and done the whole scouting thing, and I think what that does is hone me in on a general area. Yeah, there's elk in the area. It doesn't necessarily tell me where the bulls are, where they're going to be when the rut kicks in. So my strategy during hunting season is basically every day is scouting, and I'm looking for elk, specifically looking for a bull that's bugling. And so I'm covering country during the season with a bow and a tag in my pocket. And realistically, all I'm doing is scouting. I'm just trying to find an elk. I'm not honed in or focused on one specific bull. 99% of the time, I'm just looking for a bull that's bugling to call in, and then I call him in or try to call him in and hunt it from there. So yeah, it's a combination, I think, of scouting and hunting for me all throughout the season. So not having ever been in the unit before isn't necessarily a big negative, or doesn't necessarily take away from our success or chances of success, because our style is get on a ridge and cover country until we find a bull to bugle and then go and hunt it.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've kind of talked about this before, and your obviously your hunting style would be calling, but kind of how would you describe your calling style? I know you've in the past have said you're kind of an aggressive caller, but just kind of break down basically from when you're getting out there, like you said, you're trying to locate bulls, and your calling style from that point.
Yeah, so we cover country. We get on a ridge that'll allow us to access 5-6 miles back in. And most of our hunts are day hunts. I've done some bivvy hunting, but I've really found that being able to access, that 5 miles range from the truck, I can hike back in 5 miles and come back out in a day. Obviously, if you shoot one, that makes it a little bit more work. But at the same time, I don't want to go back in 5 or 6 miles with a bivvy camp and set up and hunt in there and waste a couple days finding there's no elk and then come back out. If I go in, there's no elk, I'm out, I'm in the truck, and I move 10 miles up the road and I try another drainage. So our style is very mobile, on foot especially, and just covering country. So we get on the ridge, we throw out a location, bugle, a bull responds. The key that I've found is getting close to them before we set up. So we try to move in as close as we comfortably can. And then from there, I get aggressive. People say you got to coax them in with cow calls or sound like a young bull. I give them everything I have. When I bugle, I give them all the aggression and force that I can with the bugle. And I'm sure there might be a couple bulls a year that I scare away, or that are, I'm just done fighting. But realistically, it all comes down to aggressive bugling that I rely on. And, we've talked, you and I've talked before we started the podcast just about what happens when things don't go right. And calling is not something that's going to work every time. And we've got to be ready to adapt. But I certainly go at it full throttle with aggressive bugling.
So is your routine virtually the same in every situation, or do you vary it? And when would you vary it?
It's the same in every situation for me. And I break it down into what the elk are responding to. And in my opinion, elk are responding to emotion. They aren't necessarily communicating in a language, having a full conversation. If I'm trying to call in an elk, I'm trying to ping on two emotions, and that's either their desire to breed or their desire to fight. And my calling strategy, revolves around those two emotions. And if I give a cow call, I'm trying to convince him that, hey, there's a cow here, you're wanting to add her to your herd, come in and round her up. And sometimes if you're trying to do that and then you throw out a bugle all of a sudden, he's going to get a little bit timid and say, there's another bull there, she's already got a bull, I'm going to have to go in and fight if I do that. So if I'm cow calling strictly and he's coming to that, I'm not going to throw in a bugle. But on the flip side, if I throw in a bugle, the only thing that's going to convince him to come in is to fight, either to take a cow or to, because I've triggered the testosterone in him to the point where it's tipped over and he's coming in to stomp me into the ground. And so everything I do is strictly on trying to convince him that I'm a sweet sounding cow and he's got to come in because he wants to breed, or I'm a fired up bull and I challenge him to get in his face and call him names to make him want to fight.
And I think it's important to always know that you can always escalate things, but it's hard to go back down. And so kind of keeping that escalation in progression.
And that's true. I start right off. I go for the jugular on the first bugle. So
oh, really?
I may err a little bit on that.
You start
far
with a cow
side.
Call first?
I do. So I always start with a cow call, and there's a couple reasons. First off, if he wants a cow and I've bugled first and he's looking for cows, he's going to be intimidated maybe to come in and fight. And the second thing is, if I start with a cow and he bugles at it and I can tell that he's not interested in coming into that, and you can usually tell within one or two calls the attitude that he has, whether he's fired up and coming down, glunking for that cow, or if he just stays up there and he's like, hey, you come up here to me. So I cow call a couple times and get him to respond, and then I hammer him with a challenge bugle. And it's, I try to stress that in my strategy. My strategy is simple, but there's a couple really key points. And number one is you've got to respond to the bull. If you bugle first and he responds to you, he's issuing the challenge and he's saying, you're too close to me. If you come any closer, you're going to have to come up here and fight to settle this. And he's going to stand there and wait for you. And, we see that all the time. The bull hangs up out there at 120 yards and won't come any closer. And we can't move closer. We're caught on the edge of an opening or something. And if we flip that around and let him bugle first, which giving a cow call first from our side gives him the chance to respond with the bugle and gives us a chance to give the challenge to him. And when we challenge him, we're basically saying, you just talked to my cow and I'm not happy with that. You're an idiot. Come down here and let's fight. And put that emotion into that challenge. Then the ball's in his court and he's got to make his way down to you. And I've found that getting those bulls to break loose and come in increases exponentially when you're close to them and when you're the one that issues a challenge. So we very rarely bugle first, trying to get a response out of them.
No, that makes sense. It's put the ball in his court. But I got a question for you. What happens when you move in and you cow call, he bugles, and then you challenge him, but you don't get any response? What's your next move there?
As long as I can sit and wait. I'll wait a little bit and then give him another cow call and hope that he responds. And at that point, it's 50-50. He might be sneaking in silent to check it out or hope he can steal a cow. He might have turned and went over the ridge with his cows and be in the next canyon. He might just be hanging out there, not sure what to do. So, we try to be patient and go through that same routine a few times. But if he doesn't respond, we might rake a tree trying to get him, if he's still there, to do the same. But on the flip side, I don't want to be too patient, because if he did turn and go down to the next canyon, he might be half a mile away by the time we get to the ridge. So
how long do you wait? Because I know that can wear on you, and you can just assume they're off in the next canyon. Man, I got to make a move. And then in other times, they'll be standing there for an hour and not do anything. So how do you make that decision on when to hold them and when to fold them?
So I'm really impatient. I'm looking for the bull that wants to die that day. And everywhere, I always say, in any unit during any day of the elk season, specifically speaking about September, there is a bull somewhere in that unit that's fired up and wants to die. And when I say wants to die, it just means they're out of their mind. They've forgot about their senses. They'll come in with the wind right in their face. They're not worried about checking the wind. And, that bull wants to die. He's easy to call in. Up. Yeah. And every day of September, somewhere in that unit, there's a bull that's like that. So my goal is to find him. And if there's a bull that's quiet and I'm really having troubles coaxing him in or getting him to respond or something, I'll get aggressive and, try to slip in and either spot and stalk, work my way in close to him. And if he's not there, continue on. Or sometimes we'll just get up and move on up the ridge. If there's another bull bugling up there that we can hear, we'll leave a setup and go to the one that's fired up.
Now, having said that, I know there's certain situations where it just doesn't feel like a bull is fired up. Say you're up on a ridge and he's down in a hole and you kind of heard him talk, but you just kind of got that feeling that he's not hot. It's probably not going to happen. Is that a bull you keep walking by and in hopes to find a hotter one, or how do you make that call?
I typically don't walk by any elk that's making noise, and like you said, you can tell they're either bedded down and given a half-hearted bugle, or, they aren't fired up. You can tell it in their bugle. But as long as he's responding, I feel I have a chance of calling him in, and that goes up, greatly. The chances go up greatly the closer I get to him. So I want to get in close. If he's responding a little bit, I'm going to work inside 120, 150 yards and give him everything I can. And basically, he's either going to come running to me or go running the other way because I've got too close and too aggressive. And at that point, then I'll make the decision to move on to another one.
That's a good strategy because at least, you checked it and you didn't spend a lot of time at it. I know a lot of guys can sit there and spend 5-6 hours trying to work a bull that may or may not happen, and then you've just wasted 5 or 6 hours, which is very crucial, on the 5 or 7 day hunt.
Absolutely, yeah, and you'll hear people say, "Well, I hunted this area and we were there 5 days and didn't see a track or anything." Man, if I'm there for 4 hours and don't see a track or anything, I'm in a new area. So it's, when I say I'm running through the woods, it sounds like I'm carelessly running through there, busting elk left and right. It's not that careless and aggressive. We're lucky to call in a couple elk a day if we get into a really good area with good elk hunting. So it's not like I'm just kind of, I don't want to give the impression that we're out there chasing off all the elk and letting them wind us and blowing by them if they aren't calling. It's certainly not like that. We're hunting public land on over-the-counter tags, so if we do get into a couple elk a day, we feel pretty fortunate.
No, absolutely. It's just not that many in these public land hunts sometimes. Now, you have been criticized for being kind of an overcaller. I remember, I don't know when it was it a year or two ago that someone had left a note on your window about, overcalling a canyon, which I thought was purely ironic, the 8-time world champion overcalling. But what's your thoughts, or what was that situation actually, and what's your thoughts on overcalling?
Whoever left the note, I would love to shake your hand because you are absolutely right. I mean, the note says, I've got it pinned right here on my computer screen, right next to my computer. It says, if you were up this drainage this morning, you bugle way too much. And way too much is all capital. It's underlined exclamation points at the end. And I agree. I mean, they are 100% right. There is nothing false about the note they left. But I feel that bugling way too much is what brings in all the elk that we call in. It's our style of calling, our style of hunting, being very vocal, and we can slip around the woods and hope to catch a glimpse of an elk feeding through the trees or something in front of us. But ultimately, my goal is to locate an elk and to call him in. And the way I locate elk is with a bugle. So if I get on a ridge and I'm covering country on a ridge, and I come to a point where I can see down into a draw on the other side of that I know my bugle hasn't echoed into before, I'm going to bugle there. Mm-hmm. And if that means I bugle every 3 minutes on my way up a ridge because I bounce back and forth on draws coming out left and right, different access points, I'm going to bugle a lot. And then when we get in on that elk, it's chaos. It's me and the elk bugling back and forth for usually only a few minutes, but there's usually a lot of bugles exchanged there. And so my style is I bugle a lot, and I think some people, as they sit across the canyon at the end of the skid road on their four-wheeler and turn it off, and all they hear is me bugling for 10 minutes there 4 or 5 times, they might get frustrated. But in the time it took him to ride his four-wheeler back to the truck and leave a note for me, we probably called in a couple of elk, and may have even been packing one out while he was leaving the note for us. So.
We actually had that happen. We were in there, and the irony of this is I'm a very aggressive caller too, and spend a lot of time calling. And we were in a drainage, and it was just so many bulls in the drainage that it was pointless to bugle. I mean, there was 10 bulls bugling, and so we weren't actually bugling, and we were just trying to move on one, and kept moving on. Ended up shooting him that night, and we had the video, so looked at it. It was kind of high, kind of a little far back, so we waited until the next morning, and we're going to the same spot, and there at dark or at daylight, and a guy pulls up to the truck. He just cussed us out for bugling too much, and I couldn't really say anything because I didn't want him to know that there was that many elk in there, obviously, and I just kind of took it and laughed, and I didn't even bugle that night, so it was just ironic, but that happens.
Yeah.
So is there a point where people can bugle too much, or do you think as a locate it's fine to bugle or to locate a lot, or is there over bugling once you get inside a certain distance, or what's your thoughts on it?
I think there is. I think there's a point where It's a fine line between being an aggressive caller hunter and educating the elk. And, if you were to walk up the bottom of a drainage during the middle of the day with all the thermals going up both sides and bugle every 30 seconds, you're educating the elk. They hear that bugle and they associate it with the scent that's coming up out of there. And that's a bad thing. So, our strategy when we're hunting, we're always going in a way that we aren't going to be blowing elk out. We're always cautious of the wind. And, if I was going to leave a note for somebody, it would be, why did you come down from above the elk when the thermals were coming down? Things like that really educate the elk and blow them out of an area. And so there are, I think there's that fine line between being a smart caller and overcalling and being careless and overcalling. And again, if the elk hear calls continually, and they're continually getting bumped by people, they're going to get call shy. They're going to be a lot less vocal. And the areas that we hunt, fortunately, the elk are still fairly vocal. And, sometimes the predators give them a reason to be quiet. But again, getting in close to them is kind of the key. So I guess my overcalling is typically on the location side. And then once we get in close, it happens fast. Either they're in our lap within a minute or two, or, they've decided to leave and the chasing game's on. But I think the overcalling, if somebody was to hear me out in the woods and feel they needed to leave a note that I was overcalling, it was probably on the location calling, just walking up that ridge and bugling off both sides. And if somebody was across the canyon listening to that, they'd be like, holy cow, I've heard them bugle 20 times here in the last 20 minutes. But realistically, the elk that we're calling to are only hearing us. We're only focusing our bugles into one drainage once or twice, and we move on to the next one.
Yeah. So do you feel like that the different locations, as far as, hunting public ground and over-the-counter tags and hunting bulls that are limited entry, like what you hunted in Arizona, are those two different elk as far as being able to call them or styles to call them, or are they very similar?
I would say they're very similar. I think the tactics and the strategy changes a little bit, but still I'm trying to trip that trigger on those two emotions, either the desire to breathe or the desire to fight. And, an elk's an elk. The bulls are filled with testosterone. And, if you get in their face and scream at them and get them to want to fight, they're going to fight. A place like Arizona, there's bulls that are broken antlered every year. That's because they fought other bulls. And that's my goal, is to make them want to come in and fight me. So the calling sequence stays the same. The strategy changes, though. I think the demographics of the elk change that. A place like Arizona, you've got no predators. You've got limited people. So, the elk, there's more elk than people there. You've got a higher bull to cow ratio, an older age class of bulls, all these things that create a very different demographic than when we're hunting an area with a low population, with a low bull to cow ratio, with a younger age class of bulls that aren't as aggressive. All of these things, the demographics are different. So you really have to, it changes the way we go into the setup and the way we locate the elk maybe. But once we get in close and set up, the actual call-in sequence, stays pretty much the same.
So do you think that the bull to cow ratio has a higher effect than the hunter to elk ratio, or the number of hunters in an area?
I don't know that I would compare the two on the same plane as far as which one, has more effect, but more people definitely make the elk more call shy, spread them out a little bit, push them into the harder to access and the overlooked areas. A higher bull to cow ratio, you're going to have more satellite bulls that might be more, apt to come to the calls, more, easier to influence with the calls. But at the same time, you're going to have the bigger bulls that are going to be sticking a little bit tighter to their herd because they don't want to lose them. They aren't as interested in a cow call or two because they've got their herd and it's established, and they're more busy fighting off the satellite bulls around there and don't have time really to fight or to come to a cow. So if I can find a mature bull in an area where he's the only bull and he just has a couple cows and he isn't being continually harassed by satellite bulls, I feel fairly confident that we can call in that bull, even though he has cows and he's going to come in aggressively. If I get in an area where there's 3 or 4 herds and satellite bulls running all over, it can be pretty difficult to, number one, get in close enough to make the call, but then to convince him to come away from his cows and leave them unattended with satellite bulls running around for even a couple minutes.
like you said, they're very different dynamics, but both can influence it a lot. Another one we see a lot, or I get a lot of questions about, is the earlier late season. Now, I know you had kind of talked about going to Wyoming early this season versus late. What was your decision behind that, and kind of what are the decisions behind hunting early and hunting late in different areas?
Definitely, yeah. So I love hunting early. Too early sometimes you limit yourself a little bit, but I like early for a couple reasons. Number one, those bigger bulls, the herd bulls, aren't herded up yet. If you can find a big bull that's just right before they go down and start establishing the herds, he's aggressive, his neck's swollen, he's getting vocal. He may not be standing there bugling all day long, but he's at least vocalizing a little bit. The elk haven't been pressured by other hunters, near as much on the first week of September as they have by the fourth week. They know the game by the fourth week. And that early season, if you can get in there on that bull before he has cows, before he's really been pressured, and especially if you get into I call it the bull's bedroom, where he hangs out that week or two before they go and start looking for cows. They're territorial, and it's just that right combination that sometimes you can get in and have a very simple call in. Set up, and that bull comes charging right in. Once the rut kind of kicks in and they start fighting and establishing the herds, we get into that herd dynamic where it can be more difficult, especially if there are a lot of cows and a lot of satellite bulls. It can be more difficult to pry that bigger, more mature bull away from the cows. Plus, they start hearing more bugles from other hunters, smelling other hunters, just getting more pressure and less likely to come into a call. So early season can be good. If I had to pick a week, I would say looking at the moon, like this year, that second full week of September looks to be an ideal week, like the 10th to the 20th, 10th to the 18th, somewhere in there. It's leading up to a full moon. You get that middle of the month, which is a good time. It's early enough in the season. The pressure hasn't really built up. So that's my ideal week to hunt. Unfortunately, that's the week that I'm not hunting this year because I have to span, 2 different elk hunts with a break in between so I can come home for a few days. So we looked at what we're doing in Wyoming and then in Montana and just felt that earlier in Wyoming would probably be better than earlier in Montana. We hunted early in Montana last year and we shot bulls. We filled our tags, but we definitely struggled to find elk, and especially to find vocal elk early.
Now, and that can be a big problem is sometimes with the early season is that with the heat, I know last year in Idaho, we were 90-degree weather, 85-degree weather, and those bulls would just stop talking, half hour after sunup. How do you manage that situation with the high heats and the elk just not being vocal? Are you still hunting all day, or what's your strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. We hunt all day, and so they're less vocal. But again, if you can get in close on a bull, and especially if he's not moving, if he's bedded down and you get in close and give a couple cow sounds, especially that early season when they don't maybe have cows or haven't really established the herds yet, it can be a little bit easier to coax a bugle out of him. And even if it's hot, middle of the day, and and people are back at camp taking a nap, we like to take naps too, but we just take them on the mountain and get up and go again. And that middle of the day can be good even in the high heat. The thing that you really have to worry about is just taking care of the meat. And that's I think the biggest fear and the biggest drawback to hunting, especially back in the backcountry like that when the temperatures are getting up to 85, 90 degrees, even in the mountains. Mm-hmm. There's definitely the worry of spoilage. And I think if you can get the hide off of that elk quickly and get the meat cooling quickly, even if it's in the shade, if it's in the mid 70s, that meat's going to be okay. And maybe open it up, get it off the bone, but it'll cool down pretty rapidly, even in that higher heat.
That, and if you can get it into a bottom, if you're gonna have to make multiple trips, as I like to get it into a creek bottom or something, because that temperature drops dramatically in the bottom of those drainages.
Absolutely, yeah. You get it in the shade along a creek or something, and it's going to be just fine.
So you touched on moon phase a little bit, and kind of the perfect moon phase, but how do you deal with a full moon, and what's your strategy? You just still just hitting it all day every day, or do you try to avoid those full moon times?
If we can avoid it, it's our last choice. But sometimes the full moon lands that third week when it's prime time. The elk are really vocal. Or sometimes the full moon lands, right in the middle of when you have to go and you have vacation or whatever. And so I don't use it as a deterrent, like I'm not going elk hunting this year because I can only hunt on the full moon. It definitely makes things more challenging. The elk are going to be going back to bedding areas early in the morning, so you aren't going to have the 2-hour or 3-hour window in the morning necessarily to have good action. And then in the evening, they're going to come out right at dark. So you're going to have 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night of that prime calling that we like to find. But I've found that during the full moon, the elk, especially those bulls during the middle of the day, get restless. They just, they're at their bedding area for 12 to 14 hours. And so midday hunting is very effective during the full moon. And I love midday hunting anyway. Over half of the elk that I've actually shot have been between the hours of 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that midday hunting I really like it. From noon to 2 o'clock seems to be really good. And when you have a full moon, the elk are getting restless. You get up there and find a bull that's willing to talk. It can be every bit as exciting as hunting without a full moon, early in the morning or later in the evening.
So a couple of questions actually you brought to my head is when you're calling midday, are you still sticking to the ridges? Are you finding that you have to get within that timber patch that they're bedding in before they'll answer you? I know a lot of guys will bugle from the ridge midday, but it doesn't seem to be nearly as effective as like what you were talking about, moving in tight a little bit, whether they're there or not, and just kind of slowly working that midday hunt.
Yeah, we still do the same strategy as far as location. So we'll get on a ridge. We have to be very strategic about what ridge and where we're calling, knowing that the elk are probably going to be bedded on a north-facing slope. So thermals, there can be midday even on a north-facing slope. Sometimes you've got down thermals till 11 o'clock or noon just because of the cooler ground temperature there. So you have to be a little bit more careful about that. But if we get on that open ridge, thermals are going up. As long as we aren't working our way straight towards a basin that we want to hunt, so they're smelling us. My strategy is get on a high ridge and cover that and bugle down into the north-facing slopes on the opposite side of it. And you aren't going to stand on an open hillside and get a response from an open hillside across from you. So we're selective on where we call and how we do that, looking at those bedding areas and getting there. But we've had good luck getting responses from the ridge in those bedding areas. And obviously, closer is always better. But a bull will often, during the middle of the day, you might have to bugle 2 or 3 location bugles before he gives you just a little moan or a whine. But at that point, we've located and we know where he's bedded, and we can slip in close and then work the magic with the calls from there.
So do you feel like you need to locate a little bit longer? Do you feel like you spend more time on, each location sending out locate bugles during day versus, say, morning or evening?
I think we slow down a little. I think we take our time and let out a location bugle and maybe wait 5 minutes and let out another one, and maybe even wait another 5 and let out a third one, rather than in the morning when we know if there's an elk there that's responsive, he's going to bugle at us. In the morning we might let out one location bugle. If nothing answers, like, forget that, I'm on to the next one. I want to find a bull that's fired up and ready to go. And midday you may not find them quite as fired up and ready to go, so it takes a little more patience.
One thing you touched on, I know in the summer issue of your Extreme Elk magazine, was decoys, and I really wanted to talk to you a little bit while I had you on the phone about decoys and kind of when you use them and when we should use them and when we shouldn't use them.
I wish I had a good answer for you on all of that. Decoys are one of the things that continue to baffle me, and I haven't figured them out, because they will work to perfection one day on one bull, and the next day in the exact same setup, everything the same, the bull sees it and turns and runs. And so I can't tell you. I really don't know. I don't know if there's something about our setup different, but I've used all the different decoys out there and had luck with all of them, and I've seen elk turn inside out trying to get away from them with all of them. And so I haven't found a rhyme or a reason to why they work or why they don't work. So I utilize them. I definitely have a decoy on my pack, but I utilize it more of a last resort. So I go through my calling sequence. If that bull just won't break loose, if I have done everything I can and can't get him to come in, I might flash a decoy at him. And that might be all he's waiting for, is just that visual confirmation that, hey, there is an elk there. I'm good to go. I'm comfortable going into the setup now. And at that point, realistically, I'd say my success has been 50-50 with getting them to come in to the decoy. And, up to that point, I've done everything I can. So I'll take 50-50 odds at that point all day, but I can't explain it. We've set them up in open meadows, we've set them up in open timber, we've set them up in brush, we've, everything, and we've had luck in all those situations, and we've had bad luck in all those situations. So
So when you're talking about flashing a decoy, you're referring to the caller who's behind, or the caller that's behind the shooter, I guess?
Yeah. If we're doing a two-person setup where we have a caller back behind a shooter, yeah, the caller's the one that has the decoy. And elk are, they use their senses. They're a smart animal. They survive in the wild every day of the year because they're continually looking and smelling and listening. And so when they're coming into a setup, in an area that's been hunted quite a bit and there's been pressure, they're cautious. As they're coming into that setup, maybe they can see where the sound's coming from but can't see an elk, and that's the holdup. Something just doesn't seem right. So when we flash that decoy out from behind a tree, give a cow call or something to hold the decoy out and then kind of pull it back away, they're like, okay, I heard it, I see it, I'm comfortable enough now that I'll go in closer.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite decoy, or which ones do you prefer?
It comes down to your hunting style. And for me, I packed Montana decoys. They're great decoys, high quality, full body. You get more visibility out of them. If you're setting up somewhere and, on the edge of a meadow or something, and you really want that full body effect, that's great. For me, with my mobile style of hunting, I want something light and something I can set up fast and take down fast and keep moving. So I found the heads-up decoy are my favorites. It's just basically the neck and the head of a cow elk on a stick. And so as a caller back there, I can just literally with one hand slide into my pack, pull it off with one buckle, hold it out there, and then if I want to go, I can carry it in my hand. It's lightweight, it doesn't drag through the brush or anything, or I can just slide it right back on my pack with minimal effort. So they keep us a lot more mobile, and we don't have to go back and pull up stakes or fold anything up.
That seems to be one of the problems I've had, is that every time I set up a decoy, inevitably that situation is going to move, and then I got to go find the decoy again. And it almost every time I set up a decoy, it ends up moving around a corner or ridge and a mile away.
Yeah, and then you have to go back and pick it up, or you're there, folding it up and putting it back in your backpack while the elk's working his way up the ridge, getting farther away from you. And so yeah, heads up decoy they've treated us really well. We've had good luck with them, and they've complemented our style of hunting rather than kind of become a distraction from it.
Well, good to know. I know I use them a little bit, but it's always hard to decide when to use it and when not to. But that's good advice. Expend every effort and then try to use the decoy.
Yep.
Well, appreciate you chatting with us, Corey. Tons of good advice. And for anyone who's looking to get in or get a subscription to the Extreme Elk magazine and the other stuff that you're working on, what's the best way to find that stuff?
Just online. Our website's extremeelk.com. And there, we're pretty active on social media, on Facebook, just Extreme Elk on Facebook.
Now, that's a quarterly subscription, isn't it?
It is. It comes out 4 times a year, so we've got a spring, summer, fall, and winter issue.
And I know you probably get this all the time, but that's not enough for us elk addicts, right?
If you keep the poison away a little bit, it keeps them coming back. So I think if we overdid it, we might run out of, it might get a little bit redundant. And where it's just a niche where we're talking just about elk, we don't want to overdo it. We want to keep people hungry for it. So when it's time for that next issue to arrive, they're looking for it and waiting for it.
No, absolutely. And it's working good. And it's a great magazine. You guys put out some great content. I know you guys are kind of mostly the DIY and kind of the over-the-counter, or how would you define your magazine, I guess?
Yeah, it's all, the focus is on do-it-yourself public land hunting, and not in any way to segregate or, it's better than guided or public land's better than private, but I've hunted enough public land do-it-yourself to know that it's tough. And if the things we talk about work in those situations, they'll work in just about any other situation. So what we want to do is make sure people know that we're just regular hunters. We're nobody special. We're not elitist. We're not professional hunters. We're passionate elk hunters, and we're out doing it just like everyone else. We're just the regular guys that go and buy a tag and research online, Google Earth, and go out and hunt. And that's the passion and the focus that we want to bring out in the stories, as well as the articles and everything that are in the magazine. It's focused on do-it-yourself public lands, elk hunting situations and styles, and those situations, strategies, styles, all of that will apply to any kind of elk hunting.
Now, I know a lot of guys have had some questions about Elk 101. That was something that you started and kind of got going and grew. And can you tell us a little bit about that and where Elk 101 is and what's going on with it?
Yeah, so Elk 101 I started in, I believe, 2007. It's been 7 or 8 years ago. Basically, it was started as a one-page website that we could charge people to come to a 6-hour elk hunting class we're putting on at Cabela's. No money could be exchanged at Cabela's, so I think we charged $20 or something for people to come to that 6-hour class. And the suggestion was just create a one-page website where people can come, put a PayPal, pay here button on it. And we thought we're doing an elk hunting class. Let's call it Elk 101. So it started from that, and pretty soon we had a story there and a video clip and then a tip and a tactic, and it escalated and got kind of out of control with traffic coming there. And so we started, the blog style content there and really started giving people our experiences and information. And it came from a wide variety of contributors rather than just one person, myself, saying this is how you hunt elk. We got to, we put together a pro staff of 10 or 12 different individuals that had different backgrounds, different styles of hunting, so that people could come there and really learn, globally from that, hey, there's more than one way to skin the cat. And from that, we added a forum on there. People were continually asking us for advice on gear and reviews on gear. So we added an online store. We sold packs and calls and clothing and the whole gamut, everything you need for an elk hunt. And in 2013, we had 7 million visits to the website. And a couple of years before that, we launched Extreme Elk Magazine, which kind of took us back to our roots of content, of being able to deliver content. And they both took off and exploded. And it was tough for me working by myself in the office here to manage both of those as far as the marketing, the content, the distribution, the editing. There were a lot of hats I was wearing, and I wasn't able to focus time, energy, or any of that. And so we made the decision to sell Elk 101 a year ago, and we sold it to Camo Fire, who also owns Black Ovis. They're into online retail is their specialty. And so it was a good fit and a natural fit there, and allowed us to focus on the content side. And there's some exciting things, that we're working on to improve the delivery of our content, to, work on some digital things. And Elk 101 will always be a platform that we, I guess, are always committed to and combined with what we're doing.
Well, I know we see a lot of you within Elk 101, and that was kind of one of the questions we had, is like, were you still kind of producing the content for that, or where was that? And that was kind of just one of the questions I had heard, and I know a lot of people had.
Definitely, yeah. So for the last year, I've not been in charge of the content there. I'm still a part of Elk 101, but not from the ownership, not from the management side of it. And I think we're in the works of doing some things where we can kind of combine what we're doing with the magazine and what we're doing online. And Elk 101 obviously is a really good online digital platform for elk hunting content.
Absolutely. And you're still doing seminars, right? I know you did a lot of seminars last year. Are you going to have some coming up over the summer, or are you kind of done with that?
We might do a few local ones over the summer, but our focus is during show season, when we're at all the shows, going to the trade shows and everything, kind of, our circuit there of being on the road. We try to hit quite a few seminars there. So we were in Sacramento and Denver and Salt Lake and a few other places this spring, and able to meet and mingle and chat elk hunting with a lot of other passionate elk hunters.
Well, we all love to chat about elk hunting, and I think we could listen to you, give us advice for hours. So, but we appreciate your time, and I know you're a busy man, so we'll let you get back to producing some great content for all the elk fans and all the elk addicts out there.
Awesome, Cody. Sure appreciate it.
Alrighty, Corey. You have a good one.
You too. Talk to you later.
Bye. Hey guys, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show and maybe even picked up a few tips along the way. Join us right here every Thursday morning for more interviews and great hunting tips. And be sure to help us out by leaving a review on iTunes. For more information about this show and the rest of our guests, check out the show notes for links and additional resources on our website, www.therichoutdoors.net.